Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of While We Were Working. Thank you for joining us. We have an amazing show in store for you, and we have a very special guest. So joining us today is Maria Thorpe, one of our amazing consultants here at Jumpstart. And just wanted to say, hey, and welcome, Maria. How's it going?
It's going, Summer. It's so great to be back on our podcast. It's always so fun talking about HR topics and all the things that's going on in our HR world.
Of course. I know it's been a little while since you joined on our show, and happy to have you back. I know you've been busy working your magic with all of your clients, but it's going to be a great show. It looks like we have some amazing topics. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, the While We Were Working show is really created not just for HR pros, but it's created for people leaders. And we like to talk about things that are happening in the news, things that happen in the trenches of HR consulting, and provide our insight, our thoughts, and also a little bit of advice on how you can work through these items with your team at your organization. So for the very first part of our show, this is the While We Were Working segment. It's where Maria and I take a look at what's happening in the people leader space and pick an article that we think is important to talk about. And we know you missed it. Why? Because you were so busy working. So this article actually came out October 30th in HR Dive, and it's called Employees Don't Understand What Engagement Means. And Maria, in the HR consulting space, I feel like engagement is such a common topic. And to hear that perhaps it's something that employees don't fully understand, what a better topic for us to chat about today. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I find it interesting because every year I find that HR has a theme, like the focus, and it's it was focus of going back to work, and now it's focus of how do we keep our employees, and then there's quiet quitting, right? And all that's just kind of fancy terms of, is our staff engaged? Do they like their job, or do they not like their job? And why don't they like their job?
It's so true. And I think this is a really great reminder of, there's terms that may be very common to us because we work with them every single day. But if we haven't done a really great job in helping our team members understand, then we've missed the mark somewhere. And so this article I felt was really important because, one, it's important for employees to understand what engagement is. It's very important for people leaders to understand what engagement is. And so maybe we just kind of start our conversation by talking about what is employee engagement and generally what does it look like and what does disengagement look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I find it very interesting. Engagement is the level of the enthusiasm and dedication an employee feels towards their job. So usually those are your high performers. They go over and beyond. They also have this level of happiness to them. They're happy to show up at work. It's like that saying that if you find a career you love, you never really work a day of your life. That is what an engaged employee is. Right. And then you have employees that are disengaged. They're usually the ones who are negative attitude, nothing works. They're not the happiest. They're usually also very stressed out. They're the ones that are probably stressed on their job. And sometimes they just focus on the money. They're in for a paycheck. A long time ago, I remember this article I read. It was through SHRM, and it was talking about engagement because engagement is an everyday thing in our organizations. We want our employees to be the best versions of themselves and show up and get the job done and enjoy doing it. Work's not always fun, but we want our employees to at least enjoy what they do. And this particular article was talking about a benefits specialist who retired, and the person writing the article ran into him garden center. And this person, the person who retired, was into flowers. They lost weight. They even got a tattoo. and they just really enjoyed their job working in the garden center. And so it was interesting from this perspective that the writer was saying that every time he worked with this person in her role as benefit specialist, she just didn't like her job. She did the minimum. She was really frustrated. Versus in this garden center where she was working with flowers, that's what she really enjoyed most. And so, yes, it's very like different career traits, right? But one of the things that came out of that article that I read was like she could have started a garden club at work. She could have kind of like incorporated those things that she did love somehow in her place of work.
Yeah, it's so true. And employee engagement I think at the end of the day is one of the most important things to have your finger on the pulse of, because, you said a little bit earlier, Maria, that engagement in its kind of simplest explanation is just the general level of enthusiasm and dedication that employees feel towards their job. And so, when you think about how that shows up in your workplace, those are the team members who are generally excited every day. If you're doing something, they're happy to be a part of it. They want to be part of that team that's working on it. When there are problems, they're focused on like, how do we fix this? Or how about this idea? They're bringing something to try to move it forward. And I think generally they're excited to learn and grow, and they see themselves there at the organization longer term. Whereas on that flip side, you kind of if you were to put a disengaged worker in that same situation, those are the ones who, when there's a problem, not really looking for a solution, but they're maybe complaining. They're going to be unhappy. They're not going to bring ideas to fix it. They're going to probably have some negativity, have a bad attitude. And let's face it, Maria, we've seen both types of employees with the organizations we work with. And it can mean the difference between, an organization thriving, even through difficult periods, or an organization struggling and needing to, potentially have layoffs or even completely shut down.
Absolutely. And the other thing is I always think of is, there's so many in any organization when it comes to like the math of it, and more employees who are engaged in their role make the company more profits. It's just the way it's just the way it is. Like for many, many years. I mean, I've been in HR for 10 years now, and that was probably like the very first thing I ever learned in my HR career. But surprisingly, only 31% of employees say they're engaged and enthusiastic and energized by their work. So that's leaving, a little under 70% of people who are feeling the total opposite. And it's kind of sad. It's kind of sad.
Yeah, it is super sad. I mean, to me, that's essentially 1 in 3, right? 1 in 3 workers are engaged. So, you think about the other 2, you have more disengaged workers than engaged workers. So if we do nothing, that's not a good number, right? But one of the things that companies can do, if they aren't already, is conduct what we call engagement surveys. And, we can really call them something else if we decide that, that's not a term that really resonates. But these surveys are intended to solicit feedback from team members of what are they really excited about with their work and their employer, and what are things that they aren't as excited about. And those surveys are really important to do regularly because, needs change of team members. But we also know, and this was mentioned in the HR Dive article, is that a really big issue affecting engagement is dissatisfaction with the follow-up after employees provide feedback. And Maria, I've probably sound like a broken record because I've mentioned it many times. And, the advice that I provide in regards to any sort of survey is don't perform a survey if there's no intent to do anything meaningful with the feedback. So you have to be committed to, I'm going to collect the feedback. I'm going to do the hard work to sift through it, find the themes, and come up with a reasonable plan of action to try to address the items that team members are dissatisfied about. But kind of looking at some stats about, that feedback is that only a third of employees believe that their company will actually act on that feedback. So sounds like there's still quite a bit of work to do. But I think those engagement surveys, Maria, are a really good place to start.
I think so too. And anytime any client of mine asks for feedback, I always tell them, are you sure you want to hear the feedback? Because this is where an opportunity for employees to be honest. And sometimes our owners can't swallow the truth of what's going on into their organization. And then my second question is, what are you going to do about the feedback you receive? Like, are you going to act on it? Because it's not worth having a survey and not acting. It actually can contribute to a disengaged employee, right? And disengaged employees are we talked a little bit about their attitude, but this is kind of what it sounds like. Conversations or statements like, that's never going to work, but not provide the solution. Or we've done this before and it didn't work. Or what's the purpose of this? Or just even frustration and normal conversation, not showing up to work, missing important deadlines. It just that, all of that. Sometimes it can come from having a lack of clarity in their role and not having that lack of clarity and just kind of doing what they think that they need to do, but there's no direction, there's no support, and they're just kind of skating by because they just need the money or they just need to do something, right? So the other piece of this is 40% of employees would prefer fixes to difficult processes at work over development opportunities. So I find that very interesting, but it also makes sense because our processes and our procedures are our operations of the organization. And if something is broken or isn't working, that will frustrate somebody's job, right? I definitely see this a lot in our organizations that have cross-department functions, or even I'll just give the perfect example of going from a sales role, getting the sale and sending it to close and then sending it off to your customer success or project management team. And somewhere in that process, balls get dropped, or there's a kink, or somebody didn't do something, or it wasn't clearly defined. And that's what really leads to some of this frustration. The other piece of this, which brings up to my mind, is the communication around such processes. So much money is spent on miscommunication, and it also can damage relationships. I know on this podcast, I've talked about performance and communication as a big deal. But it is your relationship you have with your coworkers also impacts if you like your job. That's the way it goes.
It's so true. You're not wrong.
I like working with Summer. I like my job. It's just part of the package. It's great.
You bring up a really important point. I think, and there's kind of two things here that I wanted to mention before we move on to Consultants Corner. But I also found it really interesting that 40% of employees would prefer a fix to processes over development opportunities. But it makes sense, right? Because for, the team members that you have that are willing and able to grow, they're being hindered by what's broken. I always talk about, building a house, right? Like if you think about professional growth, it's like building a second story on your house. But if your first story and your foundation are totally broken, it's going to make it even harder to be successful. And we talk about, Maria, the importance of setting your team up for success, right? So this is it exactly. Fix the broken processes, fix the foundation, fix your first story of your house before you're going to build and grow to that second level. And set your team up for success, because nobody wins with an unstable foundation. And I mean, we work with clients who struggle with that and need a fix regularly. So really glad that you brought that up in addition to the importance of solid communication and being a great team member, and overall, just great employee to like that kind of creating that sense of teamwork. So cool topic. Wish we had more time to talk about it, but there's more excitement to come on Consultants Corner. So Consultants Corner, if we shift gears, is where Maria and I, we talk about stuff that's happening in the people leader community, in the HR community, what's happening in the trenches of being an HR consultant, and pick a topic that's, real and relevant, and share just some of our thoughts again on, what's happening, what you can do about it. And before we end our show, we'll also talk a little bit about how Jumpstart can help you with engagement and also our next topic. And our next topic is about burnout. Gosh, we've talked about this a few times, but it's important to keep talking about it because, we do know, Maria, that burnout can impact workers who are not only like in office, but also remote. And so let's talk a little bit about how we can help fight against remote worker burnout and, kind of dive into some stats, maybe address, kind of the issues with burnout and then some possible solutions. Sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's very interesting because I'm very proud for some of the clients I work with of kind of handling burnout and just kind of letting, professionals be professionals and holding them to an accountable in terms of their productivity and their output, not so much of when they're at work. So some of the stats that we have here as of 2023 for Forbes is about 12.7% of full-time employees work from home and 28.2% work a hybrid model. For those who don't know what a hybrid model is, it's usually a couple of days in the office, a couple of days remote. So sometimes it can be inconsistent. Sometimes the employee can have their own schedule. That's usually what it looks like. That actually can also increase burnout if there's not consistency in a schedule. Some other fun facts we have here is 98% of workers express the desire to work remotely at least part-time. 69% of remote workers experience increased burnout from digital communication tools. So you're staring at a computer for 8 to 9 hours a day versus, getting up, walking down the hall to talk to Sally. You're communicating through Slack, Teams, video chats. It can definitely drain you. Zoom fatigue is definitely a real thing. And then 57% of workers would consider leaving their current job if their employer stopped allowing remote work. 35% of remote workers feel more productive when working fully remotely. I think you have I think that's pretty much true in terms of distractions and the interruptions, right? And if anybody's like me as the employee, I remember when I was working in the office, I would always just come down and interrupt my boss for at least 20 minutes to chat.
Hello, Maria.
And then 65% of workers desire to work remotely all of the time. And then 71% of remote workers stated that remote work helps balance their work and personal life. And I do believe that giving that flexibility. So some of these causes of burnout can come from stress. It can come from business needs changing. It can come from client expectations. It can come from not having taken a vacation. And it can also be your disengaged employees. Burnout can take a highly engaged employee and make them become disengaged. So what are some things that you've seen, Summer, in terms of burnout in your organizations?
Yeah, I've seen this pop up as a pretty regular topic, and sometimes it varies based on the industry, the size of the company, like if they're understaffed. And sometimes it just happens, like I've seen it with clients because they're growing too quickly and they can't hire to keep up to the demand. But I think one of the challenges that's maybe a little more universal is non-exempt, salary team members working from home and really not having the same start and stopping point to their day that we would when we're in the office, right? Like for me, for example, I would, arrive in the office usually around 7 a.m. And I was pretty consistent about that. And I had, for the most part, for my day, my stopping time was about 6:30 p.m. So, it's like, yes, there may be a certain project that would require me maybe later in the evening to hop on and do a little more work. But on average, that was the end of my day. Work was done. There was a hard, start and an end to it. But when you work from home, it's much more difficult to create those boundaries. And I think that's a big part of the burnout because, it's easier to hop on earlier. It's easier just to keep going and going and going when you know that there's more work to be done. And that's just simply not healthy. And I think setting personal boundaries is really important, but also as a leader, helping reinforce the importance of those boundaries and recognizing that if you do have a team member who seems to always be online or is always working long hours, it is really important that you find a way to address that to help keep them from burning out, because that's okay in the very, very short term, but it's not going to lead to great health and or great engagement long term. It's the saying, Maria, like burning the fuse from both ends. It's absolutely true.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. And it's very interesting because when you're remote, your communication decreases in terms of like this in-person nonverbal cues. And then you have, connection, the difficulty of making connections. So one of the things I also found interesting from all these fun facts was that 53% of remote workers find it harder to feel connected to their coworkers, and implementing virtual team building activities and regular check-ins can foster a sense of community and connection. And so, you're also talking about like the digital communication piece, and we were talking about fatigue. It's I find too, like with people who use Slack or Teams, they have the apps on their phone, constant notifications coming in. And when you were talking about boundaries, one of my biggest boundaries is I don't have notifications on my phone. And so when I'm on, I'm on. And then when I'm off, I'm off. And so it really also comes up to the individual as well to make sure you're not constantly checking said apps. But also as for leaders is don't be messaging your people after 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
There's these really cool features that can schedule messages for first thing in the morning that's top of mind. And if it's not top of mind for them, you have to give them some time to respond.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think in addition to that last point, Maria, because, we're in totally different time zones, right? So if I'm working, for example, until, 7 at night, that's 10 p.m. your time. So it is important, right, that you don't have those notifications on, right, to be receiving those messages, but also making sure that as people leaders, we are setting the expectations with our team. And I've seen one of my clients do this really well. They have it in their actual email line that said something to the effect of, I work at hours that are, best for me. Please don't feel that it's necessary, to reply like at the time that you receive this message. So it's, kind of the overarching message that is being sent is just because you get an email or message from me at 10 p.m., like the expectation is not that you're going to be online and respond to it. So I think letting your team know, hey, it's totally okay. Like if I send you these messages on a Saturday, I don't expect your response. If something's truly urgent, it's on fire, then I'm going to probably pick up the phone or I'm going to put in my message if I think that you're looking at them. Like, hey, if you see this weekend, it's pretty urgent. Can you give me a call? But I'd reserve those for like absolute, truly emergency situations. Again, it'd probably be a phone call.
You referenced the house earlier, and I'm like, if the house is on fire, that's when you pick up the phone and you call. But if your process of plumbing is clogged, that can wait.
I love the analogy, Maria. Yeah, that's so great. And, burnout, similar to engagement is just one of those things we can't really get into like truly the depths in just our show. But I think we covered a great in terms of like high level about, what it looks like, some of the stats. And, I think addressing the burnout, for me, I'm encouraging my clients to really think about if they can measure more of success on output than number of hours worked. Now, it doesn't mean, you have your team members working like 2 hours a day. But I think the reality is if a typical work day is, let's just say 8 hours, and they can get everything they need done in 7, to not punish them for being efficient, right? But if, maybe there's an opportunity to have them work on something that's career development, something that's going to help the company or them grow, like perhaps there's an opportunity there. But I think offering as much flexibility as possible, as well as focusing on output versus, hours spent on the clock is really the direction that I'm hearing team members are looking to go. And I think we're going to continue to see more of that.
Yeah, I have a couple clients that actually do a really good job where they just, in one of my offers they sent for this particular client, it was, we don't measure the hours, or like, we don't measure your butt in your seat.
Yeah, I love that. And, I think it works better for some companies than others, but
yeah,
if you're a people leader listening to the show and thinking, gosh, I hadn't thought about that, maybe there's an opportunity there. I do think it's worth thinking about. And in terms of our show today, Maria, gosh, we've made it to the finish line awfully fast. So if you're listening to our show and thinking you'd love to get some expert advice on how to tackle your employee engagement, any sort of, people leader challenges you're encountering, maybe you're starting to see signs of burnout and want to take an active approach to having a plan to reduce and help take better care of your team members. We're here at Jumpstart. We work with clients just like you every day. We can help you with either on a project basis, on a recurring subscription basis, or just on an hourly basis. So feel free to reach out to us, hello@jumpstart-hr.com. And this concludes this week's episode. Maria, thank you so much for joining. It's always great to have you on.
Thank you. It's always been fun. Engagement is one of my favorite topics, along with many other things. So it's been a pleasure.
All right. Well, hope to see you on here again soon. Thanks, everyone, for joining our show today. And make sure you check us out next week for new content. See you then.